W. W.
Welcome back to Cohort W, the official podcast of the Warrant Officer Historical Foundation. I'm your host, Chief Warrant Officer 3 Marcus Harvey, the 2026 Warrant Officer Historical Foundation Fellow. This season focuses on the legacy, evolution, modernization, and future of the Warrant Officer Corps across branches and eras as our nation approaches its 250th year of independence. Throughout this series, we are exploring not only where warrant officers have been, but where the Corps is headed in Army 2030, Army 2040, and beyond. Today's episode focuses on an institution that touches every warrant officer, regardless of branch or component, the United States Army Warrant Officer Career College. Joining us today is Chief Warrant Officer 5 Gula, representing the Warrant Officer Career College, to discuss the history, evolution, traditions, modernization, and future of warrant officer professional military education. Chief, thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me on. I'm excited to be here.
All right. So, Chief, before we dive into the Career College and PME modernization, could you take a few minutes to introduce yourself to our listeners, your background, branch experience, and current role of supporting the warrant officer cohort?
Absolutely. So my name is CW5 Jeremy Gula. I'm a 920 Alpha by trade. And so I'm a property accounting technician. I've held positions from battalion up to division, and then later as a capability developer under the former Army Futures Command. And I've been in the seat here at the Warrant Officer Career College as a Deputy Commandant for the U.S. Army Reserve for about 7 months now. And it has absolutely been the best job of my career of over 30 years.
All right, Chief, thank you. Love having you on the program. So we're going to get into first starting off with Warrant Officer Career College origins. When people think about warrant officers, they often think about technical expertise and operational experience, but education and professional development, we both know they're equally important, right? Warrant officer appointments and initial training, it used to take place at a number of different places: Fort Monroe, Fort Walters, Fort Sill, even Fort McCoy. Simultaneously, there was direct appointment of warrant officers, which was commonplace up until 1984. But then the Vice Chief of Staff of the Army in 1992 established the Warrant Officer Career College. That was done as a result of the Total Warrant Officer Study of 1985 and Warrant Officer Leader Development Action Plan of 1992. Why do you think the decision was made to have a dedicated warrant officer education institution?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think that decision was made in part to ensure that we had one standard creating Army warrant officers and to establish a proponent to oversee all those curriculums throughout the Army. Even today, the Warrant Officer Career College serves as proponent for all the RTIs and other institutions that create our warrant officers. And we also do accreditation every 3 years through our QA/QC department.
From your perspective, how has warrant officer education evolved over years from a primarily technical focus into today's broader model that includes leadership, operational integration, and strategic thinking?
Yeah, so I think before, when I was coming up, some of the warrant officers that I was exposed to were kind of in the shadows, and we can get into some stereotypes about sitting in the back of the room with a big coffee mug and some of those things. I really think warrant officers now are more in front of formations, and they're recognized as being leaders and advisors that don't always operate in the shadows. I think technical expertise is always going to be our focus. I think that's where we are relevant to commanders, but I also don't think it is technical versus being more operational or as a leader. I think it's being technical and being operational and being a leader. And three of the words in your question, Mr. Harvey, we used here, which we call the warrant officer competencies of ICOLA, and that is integrator, communicator, operator, leader, and advisor. And I think it's important that while we hone those technical skills, that we also have a little broader understanding of how to speak that common doctrinal language to commanders to properly advise them in the language that they speak while we give advice from our technical posture.
Outstanding. So, one of the themes throughout this fellowship is how warrant officers have adapted across generations of warfare and modernization. How would you describe the role the career college plays in shaping the identity of the modern warrant officer?
That's a great question too. So I think that a candidate's first exposure to the warrant officer cohort outside of what they may be seen in the formation, but especially for the street procedures and aviation, is they get that exposure here in the way of what the expectations are of them. They come to Fort Rucker or an RTI, but when they come here, they get an in brief from the commandant. Right now is Colonel Kevin McHugh, and they get that expectation up front from an '06 that says this is what I expect out of my warrant officers and how they help give me data to make decisions and inform me to enable formations. So the role that USAWAC plays there is setting the expectations so that they understand the gravity of what they're about to go off and do once they get back to the operational army. And I also feel like today's candidates are getting a better understanding of strategic guidance. And I think that helps shape how we teach here. So think about national security strategy, national defense strategy, and those type of strategic documents that maybe I wasn't exposed to until I was a senior 3 or junior W4. Candidates are getting that now, and they're getting the framework of kind of where their authority comes from and what they're expected to do and how that nests with our national priorities.
Chief, thank you so much for that piece right there. One of the things that you talked about within all of it is how things have changed. And we all know that the career college is deeply connected to warrant officer traditions and professional culture. What are some traditions, values, or experiences within the career college that you believe are especially important in developing the next generation of warrant officers?
Yeah, so I think there's some common traditions there that kind of tie us together as a cohort. You and I can talk about our class color, and that class color is tied to a T-shirt, a hat. It's tied to paint your color on the rock when you get your class colors. It's tied to your class sign. And even on Fort Rucker, if you remember, there's a polar bear by the gate. We all look at the polar bear. The polar bear now is painted up for the America's 250th birthday. So I think those things, what I'll call them core memories. We all remember our class signs. We all remember coming back on the victory run. We ring the bell, and that signifies the last real physical event you do prior to graduating as a warrant officer the next day. I mean, I think those things kind of tie us together, but they're not just core memories for us to share. They're core memories of that classmate and that warrant officer candidate with their classmates, and they also tie a legacy back to they know that every other warrant officer has done those things. So I think that kind of imparts in them kind of the heritage of the warrant officer and what they're going into and the shoulders of the people that they stand on.
Chief, there's a lot of history and values that you just talked about. And at the same time, right before that, we were talking about progression and changes. How does the career college balance preserving tradition while preparing warrant officers for emerging challenges?
Yeah, and that is a great question. So we keep right now, candidate school is still at a 5 week timeline. And there is a challenge to keep those traditions and not grow the course in length. Understand that all of those changes that have been made here with any of the one officer courses, so candidate school, WOAC, or WOIC, and then the senior course have been kind of taken out of hide, right? So we have what's called emerging topics, recent case studies from conflicts in Gaza, Russia, Ukraine, etc. And we try to tie those into the curriculum to get students to discuss those things and also talk more about AI, when it's appropriate to use it, how does it influence a decision being made, when is it appropriate to use it, maybe not on a paper you're going to submit, but maybe AI can help you build a running estimate if you are in charge of a commodity in the future as a warrant officer. So it's about keeping true to who we are as a cohort, but also understanding that the curriculum needs to change as warfare is changing, right? So that our warrant officers go out into the force prepared to deal with those emerging technologies.
Chief, I think you've done an amazing job of taking us through WOC's then versus now. And we all understand that it's evolved significantly over time. So, with focusing just on WOCs as the individual course, what are some of the biggest changes you've seen in the warrant officer candidate school experience? And how do those changes reflect the Army's evolving expectations of warrant officers?
That is a great question. So recently we instituted here what's called the CLS, or candidate led strategy. And what that means is upon arrival, prior to moving from HHC to first walk, the class leader and the leadership get an op order, and they're expected to brief that to their teammates and execute in accordance with that op order. So the focus of that candidate led strategy is to allow those future warrant officers as candidates to make decisions and kind of maybe make some mistakes, and then the tax will put them back on track so they can make mistakes here and not on an operational deployment. That's one example. So we expect them to institute the things that we talk about. So mission command and kind of how to make decisions, maybe take some risk. And then also of note, we have a new barracks project. So now some candidates were at either 2 or 3 candidates per room with their own showers. I do get to speak at some senior warrant officer events, orientation type trainings and forums. And when I say that, I get this like big sigh from the room about, oh, it's getting super easy and there's only 2 or 3 people in a room. And back in my day, I had to run up and down the fire escape in the rain and my, 7-minute drill and all this crazy stuff. And when I let them get that out and I kind of just let them be heard for a minute, and then I'll pause and I'll say, well, I would submit to you that maybe half of this room wouldn't pass the academics right now. It gets really quiet really quickly. So I will tell you that there is more put on the candidates to kind of plan and execute their own training. They have more freedom with PRTO than we did. As a PRTO, they can kind of build their own PRT sessions. There are still those requirements for graduation, the victory runs, the 4-mile assessment, the 10K ruck march, etc. But they do have days where they're allowed to and encouraged. Just being honest with you, they're encouraged to submit their own PT plans so that they're thinking about, well, if we did a 10K ruck the previous day, maybe today should be more recovery and stretching, right? So it kind of makes them think through holistic health and fitness concepts and some things that maybe you or I wouldn't have had when we came through here. It was kind of more I'm not going to say structured, but it was more rigid of a training environment, where now they can kind of plan some of those things for themselves. But it's definitely an academically harder course. You had asked about bigger changes. They also have an oral panel now as a capstone event at the end of the course. It's a panel of 3 people. So those 3 people will be a senior panel member, which is either one of the deputy commandants or the commandant himself, an academic instructor, and then a TAC officer. And they'll have 4 questions that they answer across the 3 departments: strategy and doctrine, history, or the leadership and management directorates. And candidates have to answer those questions and try to tie them back to concepts that were discussed during the conduct of the course. And that's to prepare them to sit in a future environment with a battalion or brigade commander and brief things like a cub and those type of things, just to get them comfortable talking in front of senior leaders, kind of bring them out of their shell a little bit.
Chief, thank you for that. I know a lot of people that are going to be listening in, they're going to have those same gripes and everything else like that you talk about. And I love how you centered it around, hey, the curriculum itself is getting after what's expected of warrant officers now. So that was WOX. Now just looking at professional military education, it's evolving rapidly across the entire Army. How is the career college adapting its curriculum and educational approach to prepare warrant officers for modern operational environments, data-centric decision-making, multi-domain operations, and future warfare?
Yep. So I will tell you, myself and most of the staff reads all those end of course critiques. So I know sometimes the first thing I'll say there is, we've all been to Army schools where people say, hey, fill out the end of course critique, it matters. And some people treat that with various levels of importance. I will tell you that we read all of those, and our student feedback is important for all levels of PME or for candidate school. But what we're doing is we do have what's called emerging topics. And those are topics that we gradually introduce through the ITMB process, which is a quarterly process where we bring up, hey, we'd like to introduce this topic. Let's use urban warfare and the war in Gaza as an example. And part of that is I have to research, where do we put that content, in what space in the course, and then what do we either adjust or remove to allow that to fit. So there is that process. And we do take all the lessons learned we can get from recent conflicts, to include Russia and Ukraine. We have some people on our staff who have been part of those operations recently. We incorporate their feedback as well. And also keep in mind, we get our deputy commandants and our senior instructors from the operational Army. So a lot of those warrant officers come to USAWOC with relevant recent experience, and we're able to tap into that. And then we vote on that during that board process where we introduce those things into the curriculum. There's also been, just on the theme of emerging topics, some of those have been data to decisions and making, it was in your question, but kind of having decisions rooted in data versus just, well, chief knows things and he or she said so, right? So how do we advise a commander using data to enable them to make decisions that empower the formation?
Chief, what I want to ask now is, from a career college perspective, what are the most significant changes you've seen in warrant officer education over the past several decades?
Yeah, so I think the focus has shifted from, here's this block of instruction, memorize some things, look at, 200 PowerPoint slides in 2 hours, and then take an exam, to actually having and encouraging professional discourse through the experiential model, and kind of having more of an adult learning experience where people can bring in different experiences from, different deployments, maybe different echelons. You have, the Common Core curriculum is where people kind of come to get reblued in Army doctrine and newer initiatives. And so we're all speaking the same language. And I think a big shift there has been trying to understand where we fit in with other warrant officers and their functions and systems, and maybe getting a better appreciation for that as a cohort. So you feel like, hey, if you're an aviator and you're part of maneuver, you need to link up with the sustainment folks because that's where your fuel's at. And I think it's more of a relative thing of where do I fit and how do I enable a formation or a commander, but the education is delivered in a way that makes it okay or encourages the discourse so people can get to their own conclusions. Like it's more subjective in my opinion. And even some of the coursework when it comes to the writing assignments, some of those topics are not as strict as they used to be. So there'll be guidelines in a rubric that says you have to discuss these 3 or 4 topics, but you may be able to pick the leader or pick a battle and those types of things. So I think it really allows people to lean into topics that they're either familiar with, have a passion for, or that they're good at, and then kind of explain that to their classmates.
Okay, Chief. So you've talked a lot about the evolution of warrant officer education and everything else, but what I want to get into, because our focus is history, what lessons from previous generation of warrant officers are still being taught today? Like what's still there that was at the root and the foundation of everything that we had going on prior at the career college?
So we do go over the two study and some of those other kind of founding documents of the Warrant Officer Corps and later cohort in the Army. Of significance, I think, since you talked about foundational things and kind of the root of us as warrant officers, we have a heritage of the warrant officer that we teach to candidates. And I've had the pleasure of teaching that a couple times now. And I get to I kind of do a little show and tell, and I pass out my class coin and throughout the room and ask them about it, because the coin that you or I have is probably pales in comparison to what they have now. Now the coins are like belt buckles. But we do bring up some of that kind of nostalgic with the coins. But we also bring up how we came from the British Navy. We talk about the mine planner service. So we talk about the origin of the Army warrant officer, pay clerks, quartermasters, etc. And then we kind of bring that up through the different studies and what has shaped us today. So we talk about those in the PME courses, some of those historical references. I mean, the good part of it is most of our faculty are retired senior warrant officers. So there is they have a legacy that they also pass through the students through them teaching in our departments as well. Some of those things may include My Lai Vietnam and the massacre that occurred in Vietnam. And they discuss the ethics behind that, kind of law of armed conflict, what makes people act in those ways. And also understanding that a warrant officer is who stopped that act of brutality during the Vietnam War. So there's some discussion points there as well, but we do continue the heritage of the warrant officer cohort here.
We spent a lot on history and talked about how things are going on now down at the career college. What I want to talk about now is kind of looking to the future. As we look toward Army 2030 and Army 2040, where do you see the warrant officer cohort heading? What skills, attributes, or mindsets do future warrant officers need to remain relevant and continue serving as trusted technical experts and leaders?
Yeah, so I really think that goes back to being a lifelong learner. We have a big focus here especially with the candidates, we try to get them to understand that they need to master their craft through Army schooling as well as self-study. So that could be, ASIs, functional courses, as well as industry recognized certifications. There are some things that we have tried out lately. We call those microeducational opportunities. We've done Lean 6 and PMP, which similar to CGSC, they're offered in the evening and they're elective. So students aren't forced to do those, but if they want to leave here with another credentialing opportunity, those have been available as well. We try to get to, you had asked about skills and attributes, and we're really back to that LRM model. So it's something that we ask the candidates on that integration day, and that speaks about attributes and competencies and presence and character and intellect, and understanding that as warrant officers, our competence is tied to how much our bosses and commanders trust us. So understanding that, you know, there is no substitute for us being the trusted, competent expert that we're supposed to be.
Still talking about the future, but more geared towards the future of our cohort. For soldiers considering becoming warrant officers or junior warrant officers early in their careers, what advice would you offer them about preparing for success both professionally and educationally?
So that is a great question. I will tell you that I have never met a warrant officer who has said, I regret becoming a warrant officer. I have never heard that in my career. For people considering becoming a warrant officer, I would ask them to build their resume, so to speak, as much as they can to learn as much about their MOS. Understand that, you know, there are no certifications that outweigh performance. You still have to be a reliable performer in your unit and kind of prove your worth to the folks that are going to endorse you as you go forward, right? You're going to need an LOR from a senior warrant officer. You're going to need LORs from commanders at echelon. And I think the way you get that support is by being a trusted performer in your units. So I will say that. I will also give you that I believe, you know, something here that kind of, for lack of a better term, takes out a lot of candidates in the way of setbacks and having to redo course material is land navigation here. So I think as we look at, you know, even some of the questions you asked about technology and how we move forward with all these tools that are available to us, we also need to kind of get back to basics and look at analog systems. And can you navigate with a compass and a map? Can you get through the woods, you know, under a light load, and can you still show up at that destination prepared for the fight, whatever that may be? So I think there's really a need to look at both of those. I think there's a, you know, understand technology and how it impacts us, but the preparation has to be, you know, be the best at your MOS, learn as much as you can, enable your teammates, but don't forget about back to basic things, you know, the things that are conditions of employment, you know, PT, height, weight, standard things. I tell newer candidates that I mentor, if you're able to come here and you can run 4 miles today and pass that at your 2 mile time, so that's your 2 mile time times two. So if you have 20 minutes to run your 2 miles, you need to run the 4 in 40, right? If you can run the 4 miles today and then successfully complete the 10K ruck tomorrow, you'll be okay. So I think it's preparation and making sure that you are a subject matter expert in your MOS.
Chief, I know future warrant officer candidates and junior warrant officers, they truly appreciate what you just shared with them. As we close, this fellowship season is centered around preserving the legacy of warrant officers during America's 250th year. What do you hope future generations remember most about the role of warrant officers and institutions like the Warrant Officer Career College in shaping the Army?
You know, as a warrant officer, I look at why I wanted to become a warrant officer. I had the utmost respect for a couple senior warrants who helped shape me, and the way that I saw them is the way that I hope future generations see warrant officers and our roles throughout history. That we're the experts. That we are dependable sources of advice and answers, and that we're trusted advisors. There's kind of a stigma about going to PME and hey, we're gonna, you know, PowerPoint people to death. And what we do find on those end of course critiques is we find that USAWOC is maybe changing that perspective and shifting the needle a little bit on, hey, come down here, you know, to Lower Alabama, spend some time with your classmates, networking, learn from each other. And we're not going to PowerPoint you to death. We're going to treat you like the professionals that you are. We're going to give you some reading assignments via case studies and some other handouts. And then we're going to discuss it and talk about it and hopefully have productive professional discourse that results in us having a newfound respect for varied opinions and how we feel about those topics. But I think the other takeaway to that, and something I didn't really get to mention earlier, was we do have a senior leaders seminar program here where like candidates get to spend time with a 1-star general. WOAC will spend time with a 2-star general, and the senior course will spend time with a 3-star lieutenant general. And they'll kind of share their philosophies and what they expect out of warrant officers at echelon. And the one thing that's impressed me with that is most of those general officers, when they talk to our students, regardless of what course it is, they have fond memories of being a young lieutenant or captain and a warrant officer in their formation, helping them out and kind of helping them stay on path and make good decisions. And that kind of renews my faith in the cohort. You know, to me, I feel like we are the best cohort in the Army. I'm super proud to be a part of it, and I've never heard anyone say, you know, like I said earlier, that anyone's regretted becoming a warrant officer. I think the legacy of being a subject matter expert and a trusted advisor is something that we should all hope to carry forward.
Chief, thank you again for joining us and sharing your insights on the history, evolution, and future of warrant officer education. To our listeners, thank you for joining us for another episode of Cohort W. Be sure to follow the Warrant Officer Historical Foundation and continue supporting efforts to preserve and share the legacy of the Warrant Officer Corps. I'm your host, CW3 Marcus Harvey, and make sure you tune in next week as we continue to celebrate the 250th birthday of our nation by discussing warrant officer history, strength, and knowledge.